Stand with me for a moment on London's South Bank. Before us, a geological formation that happens to be a building, the National Theatre. It doesn't rise so much as it erupts from the pavement, a stratified cliff face of layered concrete, all horizontal force and tectonic weight. There is no polite welcome here, no grand, inviting portico draped in marble. Instead, there is an encounter. The building meets your gaze with an unflinching, stony indifference. Your eyes are drawn not to decoration, for there is none, but to the skin of the thing itself. Let your gaze drift closer. See the texture? This is not the smooth, anonymous gray of a modern sidewalk. This is a landscape. You can trace the fossilized grain of the wooden boards that were used to cast it, a memory of the forest imprinted onto this man-made mountain. You see the subtle variations in tone, the pockmarks, the tiny imperfections where air bubbles were trapped. This is béton brut, raw concrete, and its truth is the foundational text of brutalism. This is an architecture that refuses to lie. In a world of veneers, of cladding, of facades that pretend to be stone but are merely a thin skin over a steel skeleton, brutalism presents its bones, its muscle, its very essence to the world. The architect, Dennis Lasdun, didn't want to hide the process. He wanted to celebrate it. The structure is the aesthetic. The material is the message. This directness, this radical honesty, is the source of its power and the root of our discomfort. We are accustomed to architecture that soothes, that charms, that uses ornamentation to distract us from its sheer mass and function. But brutalism strips all of that away. It confronts us with the unvarnished reality of its own creation. It says, "I am made of concrete and steel. I am heavy. I am here to serve a purpose. Deal with it." Consider how light interacts with these surfaces. On a bright day, the sharp geometric lines cast deep, dramatic shadows, creating a stark chiaroscuro that turns the building into a monumental abstract sculpture. The unforgiving surfaces don't diffuse light, they carve it, they break it, creating a dynamic interplay of highlight and abyss. On a typically gray London afternoon, the building can seem to absorb the light, its melancholic gray tones merging with the sky. It becomes a mood, an atmosphere. This is not a passive backdrop for human activity. It is an active participant in our sensory world, its character shifting with the weather and the time of day. The repetitive, modular forms, seen in the stacked terraces and angular protrusions, create a powerful rhythm, a kind of visual percussion. But this rhythm can feel either hypnotic or oppressive, depending on your state of mind. It's a machine-like logic made manifest, a system of order imposed upon the skyline. Let's travel from this public monument to a private dwelling, to Le Corbusier's Unité d'habitation in Marseille. Here, the same principles are at play, but in service of a different goal, housing a community. The massive pilotis, or stilts, lift the colossal structure off the ground, an ocean liner of concrete docked in a sea of green. The facade is a relentless grid of recessed balconies, each a modular unit, a machine for living. But look closer at the concrete itself. Le Corbusier, too, embraced the imperfections of béton brut. The surfaces are rough, textured, and deeply human in their flaws. He even integrated color, painting the deep-set walls of the balconies in vibrant primary shades, creating a syncopated rhythm of color against the monolithic gray. Yet, the overwhelming sensation is one of immense systematic scale. It is both a triumph of rational design and a potentially crushing vision of standardized existence. This is the central paradox. The material honesty is meant to be liberating, a rejection of bourgeois superficiality. But its sheer, unyielding presence can feel like a different kind of imposition, a structural authority that dictates the terms of your engagement with it. Brutalism doesn't ask for your opinion. It makes a statement, and you are left to react. It is this forced reaction, this unmediated encounter with power, materiality, and unapologetic form that begins to explain why these concrete giants continue to haunt our modern psyche. To truly understand this architecture of uncomfortable truths, we must journey back to its crucible, the ruined cities of post-war Europe. Imagine the landscape of the late 1940s. Cities like London, Berlin, and Rotterdam were not just damaged, they were scarred, their urban fabric torn open, revealing a void filled with rubble and memory. But in this devastation, an entire generation of architects and planners saw not an end, but a beginning. They saw a tabula rasa, a blank slate upon which a new, more equitable world could be built. This was the fertile ground from which brutalism's ideological roots grew, watered by a potent cocktail of socialist idealism, modernist theory, and the urgent, pragmatic need for reconstruction. The decadent, ornate styles of the pre-war bourgeoisie seemed not only frivolous, but morally bankrupt, complicit in the societal failures that had led to catastrophic conflict. A new era demanded a new language of building, one that was honest, strong, and democratic. At the heart of this movement was the Swiss-French architect Le Corbusier, a figure as monumental and controversial as his buildings. He was a visionary who dreamed of cities of tomorrow, most famously his Ville Radieuse, or Radiant City. This was a concept of breathtaking ambition and terrifying logic. A city of towering, cruciform skyscrapers set within vast, park-like green spaces, all connected by massive arterial highways. It was a total rejection of the dense, dark, and winding streets of the traditional European city. For Le Corbusier, a house was a machine for living in, and a city was a larger machine for social progress. Function, efficiency, and rationality were the new gods. Brutalism became the physical manifestation of this ethos. The material chosen for this revolution was, of course, reinforced concrete. It was cheap, it was plastic, it could be molded into any form imaginable, and above all, it was strong. It was the material of the new age. The term brutalism itself is often misunderstood. It doesn't derive from the word brutal, though its critics would certainly argue the connection is apt. It comes from Le Corbusier's favored term, béton brut, or raw concrete, and the decision to leave it raw was a profound philosophical statement. The process was straightforward yet radical. Liquid concrete was poured into wooden molds, or shuttering. Once it's set, the wooden forms were stripped away, and the concrete surface was left exactly as it was, bearing the imprint of the wood grain, the seams of the panels, the very history of its own making. This was an ethical, not just an aesthetic choice. It was a declaration of transparency. It celebrated labor and the process of construction, rather than hiding it behind a polite fiction of smooth plaster or expensive stone. It was an architecture for the common man, built from common materials, its integrity visible for all to see. This ideology found fertile ground in the social democratic consensus of post-war Britain. Architects like Allison and Peter Smithson championed what they called the new brutalism, envisioning not just buildings, but entire social ecosystems. Their unbuilt design for the Golden Lane estate and their realized Robin Hood Gardens project in London sought to create streets in the sky, wide, elevated walkways designed to replicate the communal spirit of traditional working-class streets. The intention was noble, to use architecture to foster community, to lift families out of slum conditions, and to create a modern, hygienic, and egalitarian form of urban living. University campuses, art centers, and government buildings sprang up across the world, all rendered in this uncompromising language of raw concrete. They were intended as monuments to a new, progressive, and confident welfare state, their solidity and permanence a symbol of a society building for a better, more stable future. They were the physical embodiment of a utopian promise, a belief that the very shape of our buildings could reshape our lives for the better, forging a new social contract written in stone and steel. The dream, however, was not destined to last. The very qualities that were meant to signify strength and honesty began to be perceived through a different, more cynical lens. The utopian vision of architects often clashed with the messy, unpredictable reality of human life. What was intended as a powerful statement of civic pride could, on a cold, rain-lashed November afternoon, feel like an oppressive, monolithic fortress. The raw concrete, so beautiful in the sharp Mediterranean light of Marseille, often weathered poorly in the damp climates of northern Europe, its surface becoming stained with grime and algae, turning the building from a proud monument into a grim, weeping leviathan. The noble streets in the sky, designed to foster community, could become windswept, deserted corridors, ideal for antisocial behavior and fostering a sense of isolation rather than connection. The dream of the radiant city began to look more like a blueprint for a concrete dystopia. This shift in perception wasn't merely about aesthetics or weather stains. It tapped into a deeper philosophical anxiety. The monumental scale that was meant to inspire awe at the power of the collective could instead dwarf the individual, fostering a profound sense of alienation and insignificance. Standing at the base of a structure like Boston City Hall or the Trellick Tower in London, one can feel less like a subject, a tiny cog in an immense impersonal machine. The repetitive, modular forms, a symbol of egalitarian rationalism to their creators, could feel dehumanizing to their inhabitants, a constant reminder of a standardized, one-size-fits-all existence. The lack of ornamentation, intended as a rejection of bourgeois deceit, left the soul hungry for detail, for softness, for a human touch in a landscape of unyielding geometry. The architecture had spoken its truth, but its truth felt cold and authoritarian. Popular culture was quick to seize on this imagery. Brutalist estates became the default backdrop for films depicting social decay and urban violence, most famously in Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, which used the Thamesmead South estate as the setting for its nihilistic anti-heroes. The architecture itself became a villain, a symbol of a failed social experiment, its stark forms synonymous with crime, poverty, and state control. By the 1980s, the political winds had shifted. The collectivist ideals of the post-war era gave way to an age of individualism and privatization. Brutalism, the architecture of the welfare state, fell spectacularly out of fashion. Prince Charles famously railed against it, and a wave of demolitions began, with many iconic structures torn down, often with great public celebration. The utopian promise had curdled into a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. And yet, the story doesn't end there. In a fascinating turn of the historical wheel, brutalism is being reevaluated. A new generation, saturated with the glossy, generic glass and steel architecture of global capitalism, has begun to find a strange beauty in these concrete beasts. Photographers and Instagrammers are drawn to their sculptural, almost primal power. Historians and preservationists now fight to save the very buildings that were once reviled, recognizing their historical importance and their radical, uncompromising authenticity. We are beginning to see them not as failures, but as complex, challenging artifacts that ask difficult questions. What is the role of the state in housing its people? What is the relationship between the individual and the collective? What does it mean for architecture to be honest? Brutalism holds no easy answers. It remains uncomfortable. It haunts us because it is a ghost of a different future, a future forged in idealism that ran headlong into the complexities of the human condition. It is a mirror, reflecting both our highest aspirations for a better world and our deepest fears of being lost within it. And as we continue to grapple with these same questions in our own time, the uncomfortable truth of concrete remains as potent and as relevant as ever.